Privatising South Africa's SOEs, a step in the right direction. SAA 2.0, you heard right. Our national disaster, we mean airline, has new life with some experienced private sector guys buying a controlling share. But there are several concerns about the deal. We break it down in this week's episode, plus what you can and can't do under lockdown level 3 and the new driving rules you need to be aware of. So, let's dive into your weekly Simple News update brought to you by me, Verashni Pillay, and the Explain.coza team. First up, our take, new wings for SAA. We never thought it would happen. South African Airways is pretty much on the road to being privatised after government sold 51%, a controlling stake of our national airline, to a private consortium with serious aviation industry's chops. The P word, privatisation, has long been considered blasphemy by our left-leaning government and its trade union partners. They're stuck in a somewhat Soviet time warp when it comes to state-owned enterprises. But this is the end of a long, torturous business rescue process. Most people, including Finance Minister Tito Mboweni, hoped the process would result in the airline being liquidated. But his cabinet colleague, the principled though woefully business unsavvy Pravin Gordhan, fought for the airline. So here we are. It's good news in principle. Large-scale looting and poor governance have wrecked our SOEs and played havoc with public finances. If you think about it, South Africa's downgrade to junk status was really on the back of mismanagement of our SOEs like Eskom and the strain they put on our public finances. It's just a lot of money we've committed to them. So, the announcement was made on Friday by Gordhan and it was met with jubilation by many. After all, no one really wanted all those jobs to be lost. The 51% owners are a majority black-owned consortium called Takatso, comprised of Johannesburg-based Global Aviation, which owns recently launched domestic airline Lift, and private equity firm Harith General Partners. Now, Global Aviation's Gideon Novik will serve as Takatso CEO, and he has an impressive resume. He is the former Comair co-CEO, co-founded Kulula and Lift Airlines, and served as Chief Executive Officer at Discovery Vitality. But no sooner had the news broken than questions emerged about Harith, which was controversially born out of the Public Investment Corporation, which is the manager of government's pension funds. The firm's co-founder, Tsepo Mhlwele, is among the key men in the SAA deal, and he's a former PAC fund manager. His career in both the private and public sector has frequently raised questions, though he's always denied any wrongdoing. Meanwhile, Harith is chaired by former Deputy Finance Minister Jabulani Moleketi, so some are worried about government links. Look, it's not quite enough to cause serious concern. We just need to keep an eye on things, especially because of questions about where Harith will get the money to recapitalize SAA, which is in 16.4 billion rand debt. The government is all tapped out. For now, though, this deal is a huge relief. Moving on to our big story. Despite our earlier optimism, the third COVID wave is rapidly starting to look like it will outpace the first and second wave. In the last 24 hours, there were over 13,000 new cases reported nationally, and hospital admissions are rising. Gauteng is becoming the epicenter this time, and that being the busiest province is bad news for the rest of the country. It'll spread very rapidly from here. Hospitals in the province are close to being overwhelmed. Now, in case you missed it, in response to all of this, on Tuesday evening, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that the country would be moving to lockdown level 3 from Wednesday as the third wave gets serious. So that means we're officially in lockdown level 3 right now. Here's a recap of what's allowed now. Curfew is now imposed from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., so restaurants must close at 9 p.m. That's about an hour earlier than previously, so just be aware of that when you go out. Indoor gatherings are limited to 50 people and outdoor gatherings to 100. Alcohol for off-site consumption can only be sold between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday to Thursday, so make sure you stock up before Friday and the weekend, and only until 9 p.m. for on-site consumption. Drinking in public spaces like parks and beaches is not allowed. By now, you may have also heard that we've had to throw away 2 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine after a contamination incident at a US manufacturing facility. Now, South Africa's own J&J vaccine, which is being made at the Aspen manufacturing facility in the Eastern Cape, has then been delayed. Now, you're probably asking, what does the US's contamination have to do with vaccines manufactured in South Africa? That's a far way apart. Well, The answer is the US plant creates the active ingredients we then use to manufacture our own vaccine. So hence the need to throw it all away. Now, this obviously delays our own rollout strategy, but this time it wasn't our fault. On Tuesday, Ramaphosa announced that we'll receive another 2 million doses of the J&J vaccine in the coming weeks. These will be administered to teachers and security guards. So if you're in those two groups, make sure you register on the electronic database so you can get in line. In addition, South Africa expects to receive a total of 3.1 million Pfizer doses by the end of June. Meanwhile, EFF leader Julius Malema said he'd reject the level 3 regulations until Ramaphosa gives us vaccines. Malema said new regulations would only worsen the unemployment crisis, whereas vaccines would enable job creation. Look, we hear you, Malema, but we don't agree with shunning regulations. The last thing we need is political interference and a call for complacency. That said, those calls of his are irresponsible. Moving on to your briefs. Remember that record-breaking 10 babies we told you about last week that were born in Tembisa? It was called the Tembisa 10. Well, like many others, we were pretty skeptical about the whole story. Seems like we were right to be, and so were you, if you were also skeptical. The story has taken more twists than the road through the Outeniqua Mountains. The journalist who covered it, Pretoria news editor Piet Ramperi, seems to not have done his due diligence. The family of the supposed father, Tebogo Tsotetsi, released a statement calling the baby's existence into question and telling the public to stop donating money. They say the mother, Hosiami Tamara Setole, is missing. But, is your head spinning yet? Ramperi doubled down on the story after this, posting a video on Twitter of Setole accusing the Tsetsi family, the father's family, of ill treatment, adding that they were using the decuplets for financial gain. Meanwhile, hospital authorities who were in touch with Setole said they have no records of the children despite her claims to the contrary. And earlier today, Ramperi tweeted that a grand conspiracy was afoot, vowing he and his employers, the controversial independent media, would get to the bottom of it. Now, we're not sure a health department that can't seamlessly coordinate a vaccine rollout in a pandemic is somehow successfully conspiring to hide 10 babies from, well, everyone. But hey, weirder things have happened in this strange country of ours. Watch this space, but we're not holding our breath for those 10 alleged babies. On to some crazy sports news. Football Ronaldo cost Coca-Cola $4 billion? What? One would swear stock markets are like a freshly pubescent teen, sensitive to literally anything. When soccer superstar Cristiano Ronaldo moved 2 bottles of Coke from his desk during a press conference and encouraged people to drink water instead, the Coca-Cola company lost $4 billion in market value. The numbers indicate that shares fell by 1.6% almost immediately after his little switch, although some think it still could be a coincidence. Still, imagine being that powerful. If he can move billions, on paper at least, with one comment, it's no wonder so many opponents fear his fancy footwork on the pitch. On to some business news. Andre de Ruyter is the first Eskom CEO in 15 years who has managed to reduce debt at the ailing state-owned power utility. Eskom's debt has come down by 90 billion rand since he joined in January 2020. Some background. In 2005, Eskom was sitting at a debt of 30 billion because of dodgy transactions, financial mismanagement, and corruption. Thanks, Guptas. By 2020, that had ballooned to 488 billion rand. Can you imagine? From 30 billion to 488 billion. I can't even conceive of that much money, and that was over 15 years. So now he's brought it down by 90 billion, but there's still 400 billion, which is obviously a lot. But according to this news, De Ruyter seeks to clear more debt by 1, increasing electricity tariffs, eek, that's you and I in the crosshairs there, collecting money that is due to Eskom, notably municipal debt, and reducing illegal connections and electricity theft, which costs Eskom about 5 billion rand a year. So many billions, I can't even conceive of that much money. Now, thankfully, De Ruyter has stayed put. There was real concern he would jump ship after the racism allegations leveled against him by former Chief Procurement Officer Solly Chitangano. De Ruyter was cleared by an independent inquiry appointed by Eskom's board, but Chitangano is now asking Parliament and the Auditor General to look into his allegations again, so he's not letting go of that. While we're here, sad news is that Eskom's former chair, Jabu Mabuza, passed away yesterday, reportedly due to COVID-19. Now, Mabuza resigned from his position last year as Eskom chair, citing his inability to reduce load shedding and tackle other operational issues at Eskom, as well as apologizing for those shortcomings. Now, Mabuza was an honest business leader and held top positions in several other South African companies like Net1, Sun International, and MultiChoice. On to some regional news. On the 4th of June, earlier this month, Nigeria announced a Twitter ban after the social media giant removed a tweet by President Muhammadu Buhari, which compared the country's heinous civil war in 1960, where more than 1 million people were killed, to recent attacks on the National Electoral Commission's offices. Here's the tricky part. Buhari threatened to treat those who had vandalized the electoral offices in, and we quote, the language they understand, Deutsche Welle reported, adding that some have likened the tweet to a threat of genocide. That's a real problem. Now, the government claimed the ban was necessary because people use the platform to destabilize and spread disinformation in the country. The ban has obviously been met with mixed reactions in Nigeria. Some agree that Twitter is being used to discredit the government, and others are angry about the stifling of their expression. We're with the latter group. Censorship is wrong, no matter where or how it's imposed. In some political news, a politician leaves his party acrimoniously and contests elections under a new banner. So far, so normal in South African politics. We've been here with Masuba Lakota and Cope, with Herman Mashaba more recently, and of course, Auntie Patricia de Lille, who's made floor crossing a competitive sport. So, when Musi Maimane left the Democratic Alliance in 2019, we thought it would be more of the same. But we're interested that the former DA leader has opted instead to partner with grassroots organizations. Maimane's One SA movement will be contesting the October local government elections with independent candidates in 10 municipalities around the country. According to Times Live, he is targeting smaller municipalities first, with plans to expand to metros by October. His strategy is to partner with community organizations, which then elect a candidate to stand in their ward. To ensure the candidates are held to account, he said OSA had registered a body called the Independent Candidate Association. The body will help channel resources and training to the independent councillors. Now, I'd explain we're always on the lookout for new and interesting ways to do politics more inclusively, and this ticks the box. So, good luck to Maimane. Staying with politics, it's time for your weekly dose of politics. There's a new proxy battle between the Jacob Zuma and Ramaphosa factions in the ruling ANC, and it has to do with two versions of the party's Veterans League, the guys who supposedly fought in the struggle for independence. The first version of it is the Mkhonto we Sizwe Military Veterans Association, the MKMVA. But this is the faction that has been backing Zuma, which has some suspiciously young-looking members, people who couldn't possibly have fought in the struggle. Now, the MKMVA are the guys who shielded Zuma's Nkandla home when he refused to appear before the Commission of Inquiry into state capture. You'll remember the images of soldiers wearing army fatigues, dancing on the road. It was a little bit ridiculous. They include the likes of controversial characters like Kibi Mapetswe, Carl Niehaus, who often say wildly outrageous things and accuse Zuma's enemies of all sorts of things. The second version of the Veterans League is the MK Council, founded in 2016 in opposition to the MKMVA's support for Zuma, and which has called on the ANC to discipline Zuma. Now, the ANC's National Working Committee, which is kind of like the ANC's EXCO, if you think of its NEC as its board, has now decided the two bodies should be merged. So what does this mean for Ramaphosa and Zuma? The NWC has effectively dissolved the pro-Zuma MKMVA. This is yet another signal that Ramaphosa is tightening his grip on the ANC. We've now gone from rumours of him being ousted by the Zuma faction before his first term was up to probably neatly winning a second term as ANC president. On to adulting and what you need to know if you want to be a good adult this week. You have to watch how you drive now. A driving demerit system is kicking in on the 1st of July. That's just a few weeks away. It'll be rolled out in 5 phases. This is technically worse than a fine because if you get more than 15 demerits, you risk having your license suspended for 3 months. For every demerit after reaching the 15-point threshold, your license will be suspended for another 3 months. It gets worse if you choose to drive with a suspended license. 2 suspensions will result in the license being cancelled. Your demerit depends on the seriousness of the offence. There are literally 1,000 ways you can score a demerit. Here are a few of the more common ones. 1. Failing to stop for a traffic officer. 2. Driving over the speed limit by over 40 kilometers per hour. 3. Driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs. And 4. Driving a vehicle without the consent of the owner or person lawfully in charge. Best to start familiarizing yourself with the rules of the road, or you might end up having to go through that grueling process of learning how to drive again. 5-point checks included. Can you imagine? I'm breaking out in a sweat just thinking about my driving license test. On to some good solutions news. We love an entity that goes above and beyond the call of duty. Now, bosses at mining company Pan African Resources in Barberton and Mpumalanga were so aghast at the lack of jobs in the area that they felt they had to do something more, Business Times reported. So, they researched the most labor-intensive operation that could succeed in the region and are now starting wait for it, berry farm. That's as far as you can get from a mining company. This is important. While our GDP grew unexpectedly in the first quarter of this year, it was the sectors that aren't labor-intensive, like financial services, that did so. We need more jobs in sectors like mining and agriculture to absorb the huge amount of largely unskilled labor in South Africa. So a big well done to Pan African Resources and its CEO, Cobus Lutz, who said conditions in the local community are so desperate that he cannot allow his business to run as usual. The project will create 400 seasonal berry-picking jobs from June to October and expects to create over 800 jobs in its second and third phases. Good news for work for jobs, of course. And to your last story, a big court win for millions of rural residents. Last week, the controversial Ingonyama Trust was dealt a heavy blow by the Pietermaritzburg High Court for making people living on ancestral land pay rent. The court ruled that the policy introduced by the trust in 2012 is unconstitutional and unlawful. That policy saw millions of people go from effectively owning their land thanks to a permission to occupy certificate to being mere tenants who had to pay rent. Now, in 2019 alone, the Ingonyama Trust collected a whopping 90 million rand in rent from people living on its land. Many of these people are elderly and poor women who have long been actively excluded from land ownership because of the trust's patriarchal system. Now, the court ruling slammed government as well, which was caught sleeping while the trust pretty much stole from its citizens. Once again, thank goodness for our judiciary and the civil society bodies that took the matter to court. That's it from us at The Wrap, a product of Explain.co.za. Simple news summaries for busy people. Remember to share the love, tell your friends to sign up for the updates at Explain.co.za/subscribe. Till next time, goodbye from the team.